Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. The House Rules Committee meets all night and then all day on the Republican tax cut and spending cut package called Budget Reconciliation, or the One Big Beautiful Bill, as negotiations continue among Republicans to reach the near unanimity that will be needed to pass it through the House without any Democratic votes. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson feeling confident that he's reached that position and that a vote will be coming up soon. Education Secretary Linda McMahon testifies before a House Appropriations Subcommittee on the Trump administration efforts to close the department and shift education money and programs to states. President Donald Trump confronts South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa in the White House Oval Office over what President Trump claims is a genocide against white South African farmers. A federal judge rules Trump administration unquestionably violated a court order when it deported 7 immigrants from Asian nations to South Sudan. The Homeland Security Department spokeswoman accused a local judge in Massachusetts of trying to force the U.S. to bring back these uniquely barbaric monsters. And Congressman Gerald, Connelly, Democrat from Virginia, has died at the age of 75. Congressman Bobby Scott, also Democrat from Virginia, posting on X, he was a relentless advocate for his constituents and a true public servant who loved America, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and his hometown of Fairfax. I will miss our friendship and his infectious energy and humor. And we start with a budget reconciliation. The Hill.com reported that House Republicans and the White House are looking for common ground, with the Freedom Caucus in particular, as leaders look to bring the tax and spending bill to the floor sometime Wednesday. The White House and GOP leaders have made progress in negotiations with blue state Republicans on the other ideological end of the conference, securing a deal to raise the state and local tax deduction, or SALT. There's also agreement on moving up new Medicaid work requirements to 2026, but Freedom Caucus members have been seeking more substantial cuts to Medicaid and the acceleration of rolling back green energy tax credits. That was from The Hill. The House Freedom Caucus members meeting, along with House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, at the White House with the president. And after that meeting, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt putting out a statement, the meeting was productive and moved the ball in the right direction. The president reiterated how critical it is for the country to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill as quickly as possible. CNN's Manu Raju, writing on X, Johnson and the House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, returning from the White House, tell a group of us they are moving ahead with a vote as soon as tonight or tomorrow morning on Trump's bill. Both seem confident they have the votes despite opposition from the right. Johnson contends they're only making minor changes to the bill. Here's Speaker Johnson as he was leaving the Capitol to go to that meeting at the White House.
Speaker, are you going to put this bill on the floor tonight, or are you going to give the Freedom Caucus more time like the demand came in?
Look, we're going to have a discussion at the White House about that. We're trying to get the bill in its best possible form, and we're trying to meet our deadline for the vote. The president's called for it. We've been saying this for many months, that we would do it before Memorial Day, and I intend to hold the discussion.
But, Mr. Speaker, why aren't the holdouts listening to you, Mr. President?
There's a lot of listening and a lot of discussion. It's been very productive. The guys that still have concerns, we're working through. Everybody around here knows this is the process. This is what we do. It's a very deliberative, slow process sometimes. Sometimes it goes slower than most of us want, but that's how the founders designed this. And so when you have a small margin and you got about a 3-vote majority, which is what we got, that margin, you have to work with every member and hear their concerns and work with them and try to meet the equilibrium point with as many people as you can. That's what we're doing. It's moving right along on schedule, and I'm very optimistic about it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
House Speaker Mike Johnson meeting with reporters in the Capitol before he went to the White House with members of the House Freedom Caucus to meet with President Donald Trump about the budget reconciliation bill, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. The chair of the Freedom Caucus, Andy Harris, Republican of Maryland, was on Newsmax TV this morning.
Well, I think actually we're further away from a deal because that SALT cap increase, I think, upset a lot of conservatives. Again, the conservatives are pushing for some balancing spending reductions. We actually stopped negotiating just before midnight because we actually had a deal that was then pulled off the table. So again, this bill actually got worse overnight. There is no way it passes today. And as I've said all along, we may need a couple of weeks to iron everything out, but it's not going anywhere today.
Okay, so what specifically do you need to ultimately vote yes on this? What are you looking for?
Well, what I'll call our midnight deal was actually to advance with the president's agenda by ending waste, fraud, and abuse in the Medicaid program. Like he said, was just fine. He was perfectly okay with ending waste, fraud, and abuse. The vast majority of Americans are okay with that. And again, winding down more of those green new scam energy subsidies. Those two things are pretty essential in order to get this across the finish line. And I'm a little disappointed. Again, it was pulled off the table after we had agreements. So look, we're gonna have to start a new negotiating, but time's running out on this first effort, and when it comes to the floor, it's going to fail. Hopefully, it'll fail in a way that keeps the negotiations and the bill alive, but it's not going anywhere today.
Congressman Andy Harris, Republican from Maryland, chair of the Freedom Caucus on Newsmax TV this morning. In the afternoon, he and other members of the Freedom Caucus and House Speaker Mike Johnson went to the White House and met with President Trump about this bill. Coming back, Speaker Johnson telling various reporters that the House will be moving ahead with a vote on the One Big Beautiful Bill as soon as tonight or tomorrow morning. While Republicans were negotiating among themselves during the day to reach this near unanimity that's going to be required to pass the bill through the House without any expected Democratic support, the House Rules Committee, which will be approving a resolution setting the rules for floor debate, has been holding a hearing nonstop since Wednesday, 1 a.m. Eastern. C-SPAN has been covering it all. Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, Republican of North Carolina, the Rules Committee chair, opened the hearing at that very early morning hour.
We're considering legislation that executes the instructions given to the committees pursuant to the budget resolution, one that passed both chambers and is binding on this body and the Senate. And our express purpose is this: to ensure that our federal spending, taxation, and other revenue-generating concepts align with the current needs of the American people. The American people and this government, by extension, cannot afford inaction. Americans need this legislation to ensure our economic survival and the sustainability of this Republican government. Americans cannot afford the largest tax hike in our nation's history. Americans cannot afford the runaway, endless spending machines that Democrats have enshrined via their policies. Americans cannot afford the inflation caused by the Democrats in the last 4 years. Americans cannot afford a soft, fragile embrace of President Trump's successful policies on the border, national security, and growth. Inflation has fallen to the lowest level in more than 4 years, as April's Consumer Price Index smashed expectations for the third straight month. Workers' real wages are up 1.9%, increasing each of the last 3 months. Encounters with gotaways, the top threat to public safety, are down by 95%. In March of 2025, fentanyl traffic at the southern border fell by 54% compared to March of 2024. Lastly, Americans and this government cannot afford to ignore the specific pro-growth provisions that President Trump campaigned on. Our bill delivers on the specific acute policies American workers embraced. We end taxes on tips. We end taxes on overtime. We boost tax deductions for seniors. We expand family-centered tax incentives like the child tax credit, the standard deduction, and family leave. The One Big Beautiful Bill is our answer to the American people's mandate from November. It is a clear, full-throated response to the millions of hardworking men and women across the entire nation who demand a serious course correction from the last 4 years and the setting of our fiscal situation on a sustainable footing.
Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, Republican of North Carolina, Rules Committee chair at 1 a.m. Eastern Wednesday, opening up the hearing on the budget reconciliation bill. Then there was testimony from the chairs and ranking members from the dozen House committees that passed parts of that bill, with Rules Committee members asking them questions. This was all night long. Mid-morning, the committee turned to members looking to have their amendments allowed. They testified about that. And first up was Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the minority leader.
Come before you today with an amendment to strike the unacceptable, unconscionable, and un-American cuts to the health care and food assistance of the American people. America is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We are better than this. The great American middle-class dream is that when you work hard and play by the rules, you should have the ability to provide a comfortable life for yourself and for your family, a good paying job, educate your children, purchase a home, and have access to high quality and affordable health care, as well as be able to put food on your kitchen or dining room table. Unfortunately, we are here today discussing a bill that would make that American dream harder to reach for millions by increasing costs for families, hardworking American families, and gutting the things that they need to survive and thrive. This reckless budget would take health care and food assistance away from millions of people in order to provide tax cuts to the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. It would hurt children, hurt seniors, hurt families, hurt women, hurt people with disabilities, and hurt our nation's veterans. If enacted, the GOP tax scam would represent the largest cut to health care in American history and the largest cut to nutritional assistance in American history in order to provide the largest tax breaks to billionaires like Elon Musk in American history.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the minority leader, testifying before the House Rules Committee as the committee is holding a marathon session on the budget reconciliation bill. It started at 1 a.m. Eastern Wednesday. Members coming up in groups to advocate for their amendments. You can follow it on the C-SPAN networks live. We have been covering it all. And again, the news tonight that House Speaker Mike Johnson telling reporters after returning from the White House in a meeting with the president and members of the House Freedom Caucus, a conservative Republican group, that they will be moving forward tonight or tomorrow morning with this budget reconciliation bill. This is Washington Today. Story from Education Week. The U.S. Department of Education will prioritize sending grant funding to initiatives that expand school choice, put more onus on states to oversee education, and focus on literacy. The agency announced Tuesday. Priorities home in on President Donald Trump's focus for education since taking office, particularly expanding school choice and dismantling the Education Department. Trump administration also aims to replace priorities from President Joe Biden's administration, which, among other things, prioritized diversifying the teaching pool, promoting equity in students' educational opportunities, and social-emotional learning as it evaluated applications for competitive grants. Priorities published in the Federal Register will be open for public comment for 30 days before the department finalizes them. Reporting from Education Week. Today, the Education Secretary Linda McMahon testified before the House Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees her department. Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat of Maryland, asked about block grants.
Does the budget that is submitted to the Congress of the United States for fiscal year 26 include full funding for those programs that the Congress has authorized and directed be established and carried out?
Well, as you know, Congressman, we are dealing with the skinny budget at this point. Not all of the programs have been put into the full budget of the president, but I can tell you that the Title I-A funding and IDA funding is fully funded under the
Let me ask you about
yes.
that. I have a table that shows me about $4.3 billion were established for those programs and are going to be, those 18 programs to which I think you refer, are going to be put down into a single grant of $2 billion. Can you tell me, now that's a $2.3 billion, that's about a 55–60% reduction. What will not be done, excuse me, is accurate that we've taken 4.3 down to 2.8 or 2 billion? Is that accurate?
Well, let's be clear about one thing, though. The Title I-A funding and IDA funding is in full.
Correct.
So they're not part of the 18 that is being compressed. So the 18 programs that you mentioned are really, they will be compressed into $2 billion which will operate like a block grant to the states, where I think they can best be utilized by understanding what is needed in the states and the communities.
So when you say we're not, I understand Title I, but almost always when we talk about block granting programs, we make very, very substantial substantive cuts in the availability of resources for the programs that are covered. That is my reading of 18 programs going into, which we are now spending $4.3 billion on, down to $2 billion. It seems to me that is eliminating very substantially, without authority from the Congress, programs that the Congress has enabled and directed be undertaken for the American people.
Well, let's look at it this way, if we could. We are eliminating regulations and red tape that a lot of these different grants had with them, and therefore they're going to require less compliance with regulations in order to fulfill the mission of those grants.
Madam Secretary.
If I could just finish this one thing.
Sure.
One stat that I think was impressive to me was that 47 cents of every dollar that goes in for these kinds of programs is spent on regulatory compliance. We want to get rid of that. Let the money flow to the states, and I think we're going to see more money available in the states with less red tape.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon questioned by Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, at a Appropriations Subcommittee hearing. CNBC writes that the Trump administration's resumption of collection efforts on defaulted federal student loans has far-reaching consequences for delinquent borrowers. For starters, borrowers who are in default may have wages, tax returns, and Social Security payments garnished. But involuntary collections could also have a spillover effect, which puts consumers at risk of falling behind on other debt repayments, according to a recent report from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Article from CNBC. At the hearing with the Education Secretary Linda McMahon, Congressman Robert Aderholt, Republican from Alabama, subcommittee chair, asked about this topic.
I noted earlier in my comments about 1/4 of the federal student loan portfolio is in default or late stage of delinquency. Borrowers who are very behind on their repayments would be in this category. Only about 4 in 10 borrowers are actually in repayment or current on their loans. And I think we need to be clear the impact of this situation that was set in motion by the previous administration is both individual and corporate. Individuals across the country are at risk of damaging their own credit ratings and going into default. This kind of financial damage can be devastating to countless constituents across the country. And our country is at risk of losing billions of dollars because of the previous administration's disastrous messaging about loan forgiveness and repayment. My time is fading away, but if you could just briefly tell us how the department is facilitating an orderly return to repayment, including directing struggling borrowers to available resources to help them get back on track.
Well, thank you. And I think that is one of the keys. We are directing them through our website, studentaid.gov. They can go and look at the different payment option plans that they can be part of to repay their loan. You're absolutely correct that we have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. I understand that COVID was part of some of those programs. It was right, I think, to take a step back during COVID. But once COVID ended, we should have resumed collection on those payments and voluntary payments. And I do believe that the past administration, with confusing messages that they were sending about loans being forgiven, et cetera, I'm not too sure why anybody would have stepped up and paid if they thought it was going to be forgiven. But we've put a program back on track now. We sent letters on May 5th. We're working through Treasury, through their collection efforts, to make sure that we have programs to collect that money. And I can report that today, since May 5th and those letters going out, we have now collected almost $100 million in back loans, some on a voluntary basis, and then some is restructuring the way those folks are going to be repaying their loans. So we're on the right track to
Okay, thank
get
you.
that.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon questioned by Congressman Robert Adderholt, Republican from Alabama, chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee that held today's hearing on the Education Department budget. Another CNBC article, nearly 2 million federal student loan borrowers who've requested to be in an affordable repayment plan are stuck in a backlog of applications, waiting to be approved or denied, according to new data recently shared by the Education Department. The department disclosed the information in a May 15th court filing in response to a legal challenge lodged by the American Federation of Teachers. The teachers union sued the Trump administration in March for shutting down access to income-driven repayment plan applications on the Education Department's website. That was from CNBC. From Associated Press, Congress may stop California from implementing its first-in-the-nation rule banning the sale of new gas-powered cars by 2035. A Senate vote expected as soon as this week could end the nation's most aggressive effort to transition toward electric vehicles as President Trump's administration doubles down on fossil fuels. California makes up roughly 11% of the U.S. car market, giving it significant power to shape purchasing trends. Vehicles are one of the largest sources of planet-warming emissions. The Republican-controlled Congress is targeting 3 California waivers that set stricter emissions rules than the federal government. The House voted to block them several weeks ago, and Senate Majority Leader John Thune said his chamber would take up a similar effort this week, even though the Senate parliamentarian and the U.S. Government Accountability Office say California's policies are not subject to the review mechanism used by the House. That was from the Associated Press article. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, spoke about this today on the Senate floor.
This week, Senate Republicans want to use a measure known as the Congressional Review Act, CRA for short, to repeal 3 vehicle emission waivers from California. These waivers have been used for decades and are vital for helping keep our air cleaner, our kids healthier, and to lessen our reliance on big oil. Republicans have tried to get rid of California's emission waivers for a very long time. The fossil fuel industry, which knows it is in decline, which knows that clean energy is not only the cleaner wave of the future, but the less costly wave of the future, but the fossil fuel industry hates them. Hates that industry. So Donald Trump's EPA tried to rescind the last iteration of one of these waivers during his first administration. But that effort fell short in the courts. The courts rejected it. Now Republicans want to try again, this time by using the CRA to repeal these emission waivers at a simple majority threshold. But what was made crystal clear today on the Senate floor through parliamentary inquiries I made to the parliamentarian, that the Senate parliamentarian has advised both sides, Democrats and Republicans, that legislation to overturn these waivers does not qualify for expedited consideration under the Congressional Review Act. That means any legislation to repeal these waivers should be subject to a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. The Senate parliamentarian, as we know, plays a vital role in keeping this institution whole. It's thankless work. The parliamentarian's advice and judgment on rules and procedures of this institution is indispensable to both parties. So Republicans face a choice. Do they adhere to Senate precedent, as they've long claimed to do, and find another way to pass their repeal? Or are they going to plow ahead, overrule the parliamentarian, do the bidding of big oil, and further eat away at the Senate in the process? Well, today we have our answer. Senate Republicans are going nuclear.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. The Senate Majority Whip, John Barrasso, Republican of Wyoming, spoke in favor of overturning the California rules.
Isn't that why Democrats and Joe Biden waited until after the election, after they lost the election in the House, the Senate, and the White House, to spring this whole thing on the American people? They were losers going out the door, and they said, we're coming after you, the American people, with our leftist dreams. Isn't that why they spent months coordinating this release with their allies at the GAO? So they could avoid, or at least try to avoid, Senate scrutiny under the Congressional Review Act? Isn't that what they were really up to? Well, it is what they were up to. So why are the Democrats so darn desperate to talk about anything and everything except what these punishing rules will actually do to America, American workers, and the American economy? Let me tell you why. California EV mandates ban the sale of gas-powered cars and trucks. No more in America, gas-powered trucks. Can you imagine that in Oklahoma or my home state of Wyoming? They threaten, the Democrats want to threaten the freedom of every American to choose what they drive. That's what this is about. EVs currently make up 7% of the U.S. market. Even in California, they account for only 20% of vehicle sales. And you know what else? The sales are stalling. They're stalling out. People don't want these. Even with the big government subsidies, people don't want to buy these things. Yet California's radical mandates require that by next year, and it's coming, we're already into May of this year, by next year, by January, that all vehicle sales in the state of California, 35% of them have to be electric. That's 6 months from now, 7 months from now. By 2035, it'd be 100% of vehicle sales in California have to be electric. Big penalties if it doesn't meet that. For the people that are making the cars, that people don't want to buy. This is a whole new meaning in California of fantasy land.
The Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, on the Senate floor. CBT News writes the Senate will consider the measure using the Congressional Review Act, CRA, which allows Congress to repeal federal rules enacted in the final 60 legislative days of a prior administration. Although the Senate parliamentarian ruled last month that such waivers don't qualify as rules under the CRA, Republicans have chosen to move forward anyway, citing their broad impact. Although the Biden administration's EPA did not submit a waiver as rules to Congress, Lee Zeldin, the current EPA administrator under President Trump, did so on February 14, 2025. Reporting from CBT. You can always follow the Senate live, gavel to gavel, on C-SPAN 2 television and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Wall Street today, the Dow down 816, NASDAQ down 270, S&P down 95. Washington today continues in a moment.
Democracy. It isn't just an idea, it's a process shaped by leaders elected to the highest offices and entrusted to a select few with guarding its basic principles. It's where debates unfold, decisions are made, and the nation's course is charted. Democracy in real time. This is your government at work. This is C-SPAN, giving you your democracy unfiltered.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Donald Trump pressed South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, writes the Washington Post, to protect white Afrikaner farmers from violent attacks in an extraordinary Oval Office conversation in which Trump made no mention of the African nation's longstanding epidemic of violence against both white and black people, nor its violent and discriminatory history of white rule. Trump amplified false claims that white Afrikaners have been victims of a genocide, even showing video of crosses and earthen mounds that he said represented more than 1,000 grave sites of murdered farmers. The mounds were, in fact, part of a protest against the violence, not actual graves. Ramaphosa stared straight ahead, wiping his face and occasionally moving in his seat and looking over at Trump, who wouldn't make eye contact, as a clip played of crowds repeatedly shouting, "Kill the Boers," a reference to white farmers descended from colonists who built and led the nation's racist apartheid regime. That was from the Washington Post. Here's part of the meeting in the Oval Office.
When you look at the videos, I mean, how does it get worse? And these are people that are officials, and they're saying that kill the white farmer and take their land. That's what it is. And I have other friends in South Africa. I have people that left. One in particular that says you can't go there. He said they want to take your land, they take your land, and they kill you. It's okay, and they say it's okay to do. Now, we're going to talk about it, but this is a tremendous, look, this is a story recent. Yeah. These are all people that recently got killed. Yeah. And I don't know how it can get any worse. These are... And you know, the men that you saw, the people that you saw in that movie, those are officials. Those are people that were in office. They had one march, they had a dance in your parliament, whatever you may call it, legislature.
But let me clarify that.
Yeah,
let me clarify that, because what you saw, the speeches that were being made, one, that is not government policy. We have a multi-party democracy in South Africa that allows people to express themselves, political parties to adhere to various policies, and in many cases, or in some cases, those policies do not go along with government policy. Our government policy is completely against what he was saying, even in the parliament. And they're a small minority party, which is allowed to exist in terms of our constitution.
But you do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can
take land. And then when they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
No, there is
nothing happens to them.
There is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately, through criminal activity, are not only white. Majority of them are black people. And we have now been utilizing.
The farmers are not black.
I
don't say that's good or bad, but the farmers are not black. And the people that are being killed in large numbers, and you saw all those grave sites, and those are people that loved ones going, I guess on a Sunday morning, they told me, to pay respect to their loved ones that were killed. Their heads chopped off. They died violently. And you know, I mean, we're here to talk about it, and I didn't know we'd get involved here. But I will say this, that if the news wasn't fake, like NBC, which is fake news, totally, one of the worst, ABC, NBC, CBS, horrible. But if they weren't fake news like this jerk that we have here, if we had real reporters, they'd be covering it. But the fake news in this country doesn't talk about that. They don't want to talk about it, but now they have to talk about it. But they won't. This won't even be a subject. They'll have him talking about why did a country give a free, think of this, why did a country give an airplane to the United States Air Force? Okay, the United States, not to me, to the United States Air Force, so they could help us out, because we need an Air Force One until that's Air Force One, it's being built, 2 of them being built. But Boeing's a little bit late, unfortunately. So why did they give us a plane to the United States Air Force? That's what that idiot talks about after viewing a thing where thousands of people are dead.
I'm sorry, I don't have a plane to give you.
I wish you did. I take it. I would take it. If your country offered the United States Air Force a plane, I would take it.
Okay. But coming back to this issue, which I really would like us to talk about, and talk about it very calmly. We were taught by Nelson Mandela that whenever there are problems, people need to sit down around a table and talk about them.
Well, there are problems.
And this is precisely what we would also like to talk about, including, of course, trade matters, investment matters.
President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, with President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. Just a few minutes of what went on for about an hour. We covered it on C-SPAN, and you can find the video at cspan.org. More from the Washington Post article. The United States recently granted refugee status to white South Africans under humanitarian designation meant for people fleeing war or persecution that the Trump administration has suspended for other groups worldwide, and welcomed roughly 50 Afrikaners to the country this month. President Trump mentioned the airplane from Qatar. CBS News has a story. The Defense Department said Wednesday it has accepted a Boeing jet from Qatar that will be retrofitted and used to transport President Trump. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell said in a statement that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth accepted the Boeing 747 in accordance with all federal rules and regulations, and that the Defense Department will work to ensure proper security measures and functional mission requirements are considered for an aircraft used to transport the President of the United States. That was from CBS. Story from Fox. President Donald Trump appeared to distance the U.S. from the conflict between Russia and Ukraine just 2 days after speaking over the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump, who called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky Monday after speaking to Putin, told reporters Wednesday that the conflict did not involve the U.S. despite the fact that the U.S. has adopted the role of mediator between the two countries since Trump came to the White House in January. President Trump said in the Oval Office Wednesday while hosting the South African president, "It's not our people, it's not our soldiers, it's Ukraine, and it's Russia." That was from Fox News. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked about the war in Ukraine as he testified today before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. These questions from Congressman Bill Keating, Democrat from Massachusetts.
Vladimir Putin, is he a war criminal?
Well, I think you can look at instances that have happened there and certainly characterize them as war crimes, but our intent is to end the war.
Is he a war criminal?
We can't end the war without talking to
No,
Mr. Putin.
that's pretty simple. Is he a war criminal?
Well, that's
this man we're negotiating with, Vladimir Putin. Is he a war criminal? That's not tough.
But what? I'm trying to answer your question by telling you that we're trying to end the war here.
Go ahead.
No,
You're
it's not a simple answer.
You are equivocating, sir. Just answer the question.
I'm answering your question, and the answer is that war crimes have been committed, no doubt. And who's responsible for that? There will be time and place for that accountability. But right now, the job is to end the war.
So you won't answer the question.
If we don't end the war, people are going to get
reclaiming
killed.
my time, sir. Let me go on.
Congressman Bill Keating, Democrat from Massachusetts, questioning Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the House Foreign Affairs Committee. An article from Reuters, unidentified gunman shot dead a former Ukrainian politician on Wednesday outside a school in a wealthy suburb of Madrid, Spain's Interior Ministry said. Andrei Portnov, 51 years old, was previously a senior aide to a pro-Russian former Ukrainian president who was ousted in 2014, the popular uprising. That from Reuters. NBC News writes after a deportation flight with 8 migrants left Texas, reportedly intended for South Sudan this week, a federal judge on Wednesday ruled the Trump administration had violated a previous order. District Court Judge Brian Murphy in Massachusetts said during a hearing the Trump administration had failed to adhere to his injunction issued in March, preventing individuals from being sent to a country other than their own without giving them an opportunity to raise fears of persecution or torture. The judge's ruling comes after the Department of Homeland Security confirmed during a press briefing Wednesday morning that 8 individuals from Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, Cuba, Mexico, and South Sudan were deported this week. According to the DHS, many of these individuals had violent criminal convictions, including murder and sexual assault. That article from NBC News, here's part of that news conference. You'll hear from ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons and Deputy Director Madison Sheehan.
These individuals that are up here today, these represent the true national security threats and public safety threats that ICE officers and agents nationwide go after. I just want to go over a few of the highlighted cases that you all have in front of you. So, for instance, we have an individual who's convicted of homicide and armed robbery and served 15 years in confinement. Due to countries that won't take their citizens back, this individual was released back into the community under ICE supervision to prey upon people again. Another individual sentenced to life in confinement, convicted of first-degree murder. His country would not take him back, forcing ICE to have to re-release him back into the community to re-offend. As Tricia highlighted before, we have an individual that raped and sexually assaulted a mentally handicapped victim. Because his country would not take him back, ICE had to find a third country to take him back so we can remove this public safety threat. You know, as a career law enforcement officer and a career officer with ICE, I've been dealing with these recalcitrant countries for years, having to see repeated murderers, sex offenders, violent criminals re-released back into the United States because their home countries would not take them back. Yet under President Trump and under the leadership of Secretary Noem, we are now able to remove these public safety threats so they won't pry on the community anymore and they won't have any more victims in the United States. With that, I'll turn it over to my Deputy Director, Madison Sheehan.
First of all, ICE would like to thank President Trump and Secretary Noem for their steadfast commitment to the American people and the men and women of ICE. Our commitment here at ICE remains the same, that we will remove the worst of the worst from your communities, including the list of people that are up on this board. As we work every day to make the American people safer, we see activist judges stepping in a way that we have never seen before to put criminals first and not the American people. This judge wants these criminals, these rapists, murderers, out on the streets in your communities. ICE will not let that happen and will continue to fight and put the American people first as the mandate President Trump received to make sure that we keep America safe. Thank you.
ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement Deputy Director Madison Sheehan, and before that, the Acting Director Todd Lyons at a news conference in Washington. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, was asked about this case Tuesday night on CNN.
A response to that, sending people who aren't from South Sudan, we think, to this nation which is on the verge of a civil war.
If those individuals were on a plane sent to South Sudan, it seems a violation of the court order. Judge Murphy ought to be really angry. His order has been violated, and he ought to consider a contempt of court motion. And no doubt the plaintiffs are considering it now, but very seriously, violation of court orders ought to be treated with the utmost of sanctions, because otherwise the law is dead letter.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, Tuesday night on CNN, and today that judge did rule, quote, the department's actions are unquestionably violative of this court's order. And again, from the NBC News article, government attorneys said the migrants are still in ICE custody and that the plane has since landed. They declined to share the location of the plane's final destination. CNN also reporting the first flight carrying migrants who chose to self-deport from the United States as part of a new Department of Homeland Security initiative offering free flights and $1,000 stipends has landed in Honduras. A group of 38 Hondurans arrived at the airport on Monday afternoon after applying through a mobile app provided by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the Honduran Deputy Foreign Minister said. From Sea Power magazine, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem announced Force Design 2028 Wednesday during the Coast Guard Academy commencement ceremony. The initiative provides a blueprint to transform the Coast Guard into a stronger, more ready and capable fighting force. Reporting from Sea Power magazine, here's Secretary Noem delivering the commencement address.
Now, our nation is facing unprecedented threats to our national security. With incredible men and women like you joining our Coast Guard, I am confident that the American people will be safe. Take these lessons as you become officers in a military service that is more in demand than ever before. The American people expect you to win, and they need our country to win. When you stop deadly drugs from reaching our shores, you save Americans from addiction and overdose, and you spare families from being ripped apart. When you work to secure our maritime trade from the threats of communist China, you not only protect our nation's economy, you secure our future. When you rescue those stranded at sea, you save lives. And when you sail icebreakers into the harsh and the unforgiving Arctic, you make our nation more secure. Your bravery, your dedication, your selflessness are reflected in your motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. Whether you leave here today to go to a cutter, if you go to flight school, a sector, defend our nation, maybe in the cyber domain area or anywhere else, you will be challenged. But leadership is not for the faint of heart. 2 Timothy tells us that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. He has given you sound minds that make good decisions. Use them. And then look out on this field. I am confident that each and every one of you will rise to the occasion and that you'll meet those challenges. As you graduate today, know that you are ready and that we need you to be. Our Commander-in-Chief, President Donald J. Trump, supports you. As your secretary, I will always have your back. And I'm confident that you will support the American people. May God bless you. And God continue to bless the great United States of America. Congratulations.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem giving the commencement address to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy graduates in New London, Connecticut. She also announced that President Trump is nominating the acting Coast Guard Commandant, Admiral Kevin Lunde, as the permanent commandant. This is Washington Today. Story from the New York Times. Congressman Gerald E. Connelly of Virginia, a feisty Democrat who prided himself on getting things done and who defeated Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York to become the party's top member of the powerful House Oversight Committee, died on Wednesday at his home in Fairfax County, Virginia. He was 75. His family announced the death. Mr. Connelly said late last year that he had esophageal cancer and would fight the disease, but in April he told his constituents that the treatments had been unsuccessful and that he would not seek re-election in 2026. Reporting from the New York Times, the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York paying tribute today.
Thank you so much for the moment of silence and the kind words of remembrance on behalf of our dear colleague, Gerry Connelly, who really was a member's member, someone who conducted himself with the highest degree of intellect, brilliance, resilience, integrity, humor, and wit. It's a great loss for his family, great loss for his district, great loss for the Commonwealth of Virginia, great loss for us as House Democrats, but certainly a great loss for the Congress and for the country, given just the depth of his representation, the relationships that he had on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the Capitol, and the fierce representation that he provided to the people that he's been privileged to represent for decades. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some brief words of reflection on behalf of the House Democratic Caucus.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, before he testified before the House Rules Committee today on the budget reconciliation bill. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, writing on X, "We are saddened to learn of the passing of Congressman Gerald Connelly. For decades, he dedicated his life to serving the people of Virginia. Our prayers are with his family, friends, and the people of Virginia's 11th District during this difficult time." Gerald Connelly represented a congressional district in Northern Virginia since 2008. He was ranking Democrat on the Oversight and Reform Committee. And today, that committee moved to rename a bill in his honor that would require the Government Accountability Office to draft a report on esophageal cancer, which he had been battling. Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, is the committee chair.
Today, we lost a true statesman. Gerry Connelly was a father, a husband, a friend, and a lifelong public servant that dedicated his life to his constituents, his community, and his country. I'm deeply saddened to learn about his passing. From the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors to 16 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, Gerry Connelly was a devoted public servant for Virginia's 11th Congressional District. In Congress, Gerry Connelly was a friend to many of us. He was steadfast in fighting for what he believed in, but he always committed to bipartisanship where he thought we could agree. Over his tenure on this committee, I'm proud to say we co-sponsored 8 bills together, including the Mail Traffic Deaths Reporting Act, the FedRAMP Authorization Act, and the Federal AI Governance and Transparency Act. And I know I'm not alone in that. Many of the Republican committee colleagues found Gerry Connelly to be a partner and a friend. Esophageal cancer is one of the deadliest and fastest growing cancer diagnoses among Americans today. The symptoms are often overlooked or misdiagnosed, leading to late detection and limited treatment options. I'm proud to have joined Ranking Member Gerry Connelly in co-sponsoring the Esophageal Cancer Awareness Act. And I have an amendment at the desk to rename this bill the Gerald E. Connelly Esophageal Cancer Awareness Act.
Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, the Oversight and Reform Committee chair at today's meeting. The late Congressman Gerald Connelly was on C-SPAN a lot over the years at hearings, protests, our Washington Journal morning call-in program, and also on C-SPAN 2's Book TV. In a 2016 interview, he talked about the role of literature in his life and work, and we asked him about the books he read on history and how it helped him do his job as a member of Congress.
Do you ever find that you can affect public policy through this knowledge or through the reading itself?
I do. When I was in graduate school, I took a course with a historian named Ernie May, who wrote a book on the uses of history. And the purpose of that course was to help illuminate how policymakers misuse history, largely through analogies, right? So, for example, Lyndon Johnson, when he was vice president, Kennedy sent him out to South Vietnam to assess the situation. And Lyndon Johnson got really taken with Ngo Diem and referred to President Diem as the Churchill of Southeast Asia. Because in his mind, that's who he was, this plucky leader fighting against all odds and all enemies and hanging in there as this bastion of democratic ideals. Well, Diem was no such thing. But that was the analogy for Lyndon Johnson. Now, what could go wrong with Johnson getting that wrong? Well, we saw what went wrong. I mean, that was in his head, and when he became president, he expanded the war based on really a lot of World War II analogies that were not apt and not appropriate for the situation in Vietnam. And policymakers do it all the time. You know, this is not, you know, people will talk about Munich and Chamberlain and Robert Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis said he didn't want his, when they were talking about a preemptive strike in Cuba, he said, I don't want my brother to be the Tojo of the 1960s, meaning a preemptive Pearl Harbor-like strike. And so the uses of history actually really do matter. And there have been many times at hearings or markups here in the House where I'll hear somebody cite something and it's kind of fun to add to it in terms of, yeah, but the other part of that history is X, Y, and Z. And so actually having a bit of a command of the history is very useful.
Congressman Gerald Connelly, Democrat from Virginia, on C-SPAN 2's Book TV in 2016. Gerald Connelly has died at the age of 75. He was a member of Congress since being elected in 2008. Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, putting out a statement, I'm heartbroken over the loss of my dear friend. To me, he exemplified the very best of public service. He said Gerald Connelly met every challenge with tenacity and purpose, including his final battle with cancer, which he faced with courage, grace, and quiet dignity. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. We'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.